My father raised his glass in front of 14 people at our Thanksgiving dinner, his voice carrying like he was giving a speech at a church fundraiser. One daughter is a doctor, the other one is a maid. He laughed, and a few people laughed with him. The polite kind of laughter that keeps the host happy, the kind that makes you feel smaller in your own chair. My daughter Ella sat close beside me. She was 8, her feet still not reaching the floor. She tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Mom, is being a maid bad?" I looked into her clear, innocent eyes and knew one thing for sure. This was the last time I stayed silent. My name is Tessa Morgan. I'm 31. I'm a single mom. And for the last 6 years, my family has called me the Maid. 6 years ago, I drove from Richmond back to Millbrook, Virginia with 2 suitcases and a 2-year-old on my hip. It's just over 2 hours if you don't stop, but I pulled over 3 times because Ella kept crying, asking where Daddy was. And honestly, I wanted to ask the same thing, because my ex disappeared on Tuesday, drained our joint account on Wednesday, filed for divorce from his mother's address on Thursday, and by Friday I was standing on my parents' porch with a diaper bag, my daughter's car seat, and whatever dignity I had left. My father, Richard Morgan, opened the door, looked at the suitcases, then at me, then at Ella, and the first thing he said wasn't, "Are you okay?" or, "Come in. Let me hold her." It was, "The cottage out back is empty. This is temporary. Don't turn it into a habit." No hug, no concern. Just terms. I stepped into that little cottage behind the house. 300 square feet, 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a shower that ran hot for 4 minutes before turning ice cold, and I told myself I just had to get through this phase. A week later, I was knocking on doors for work, cleaning houses for $15 an hour cash, while a neighbor watched Ella. And I scrubbed bathtubs, wiped down hardwood floors, organized pantries for women living the life I thought I'd have. That same month, my older sister, Dr. Meredith Morgan Hartley, finished her dermatology residency, and my parents threw a celebration dinner for 20 people. I showed up late because I was still washing the bleach smell off my hands at a client's house, and my father stood at the head of the table and announced loud enough for everyone to hear, "Sorry, Tessa's late. She was scrubbing someone's bathtub." Then he laughed, and a few people laughed with him. Meredith looked down. My mother pretended to be busy pouring wine. I sat down and said nothing, and that was the first time, but not the last. Those jokes didn't start after my divorce. They started long before that, when we were kids, because Meredith was the one who got SAT tutoring, AP summer camps, college visits. And when she got into medical school, my father took on extra debt without hesitation. When it was my turn, he pulled out a chair across from him and said, "Community college is plenty for someone like you." So I went to community college. I paid for it myself, waitressing, babysitting, cleaning the church on Sundays, and I graduated with honors, while nobody from my family showed up. After that, at every holiday, my father introduced us by the same script, "This is my daughter, Dr. Meredith," and then, like an afterthought, "And this is Tessa." My mother never corrected him, and when I tried to talk about it, she would sigh and say, "Your father wants the best for both of you. Don't be so sensitive." In my house, image was everything. Meredith's image was pride, and mine was failure. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't just cleaning houses. I was building something. By my second year in Millbrook, after scrubbing floors in more than 50 homes, I started noticing the Shenandoah Valley was full of vacation estates owned by people in D.C. or Richmond who only visited a few times a year, and those houses needed more than a cleaner. They needed a manager, maintenance schedules, key control, vendors, security checks, guest turnover. Nobody was doing it well, so I registered an LLC, built a website at 2 a.m. while Ella slept, and gave it a name that sounded bigger than my reality, Magnolia Estate Services. That month, I signed 3 contracts and called my mother because I wanted someone to be proud of me. "Mom, I signed 3 clients. I'm building something." She nodded and said, "That's nice, honey. Meredith just got invited to speak at a conference in Boston." I stood there in the kitchen, my contract email still open, and I understood in one clean, permanent moment that nothing I built would ever register in that house. That night, an unknown number called, 540 area code, and a woman said, "Hi, I'm Gloria Ashford. I'm your father's sister, and I think we need to talk." I almost dropped the phone because in my family, Gloria's name wasn't said out loud. My father called her a disgrace for getting divorced, opening an antique shop, living alone without anyone's permission. But Gloria met me in her shop, the place smelling like cedar and old books, looked me in the eye and said, "I want to invest in your company. 15,000. Not a loan. Equity." When I asked why, she set her cup down and said, "Because I know what it's like to be erased for choosing your own life." Before I left, she told me, "Family should be a safe place, Tessa, not a cage." I took the money, hired help, bought software, wrote real contracts, and over 2 years, Magnolia became real. Team, reputation, clients who trusted me. Yet I still lived in that cottage because there was no lease, and my father knew exactly where to squeeze. Ella loved her grandparents, FaceTimed every night, drew pictures of the garden, counted days until the next visit. So at a Sunday dinner, my father set his fork down like he was commenting on the weather and said, "That land out back is worth something now. I might need to rearrange things." When I asked how, he shrugged. "Nothing is permanent." No one spoke. Meredith stared down. My mother played with the salt shaker because, in my family, my father's statements weren't conversations. They were verdicts. I started looking for a rental near Ella's school, but Millbrook is small. The housing market is tight, and prices are brutal. And within a week, my mother called with a shaking voice, "You're looking at apartments? You're going to take Ella away from us." And then my father called and said if I moved out, I'd be on my own completely. No babysitting, no holidays, no Thanksgiving. He knew exactly what he was doing. And I stopped searching, not because I was weak, but because I knew he would spin a story about an ungrateful daughter, and it would spread through town into the ears of every potential client. So I told myself I had to leave, only when I no longer needed him. The cracks showed up in Ella first. Her teacher told me she'd gone quiet when classmates asked what her mom did for work, and that night Ella asked, "Mom, do you like your job?" I said, "I love my job." And she asked, "But then why does Grandpa say it funny?" I sat at the cottage kitchen table staring at the wall for an hour, because this wasn't just about me being insulted anymore. This was my daughter learning shame in her bones. That same week, an opportunity hit my inbox. A new luxury development contract, big enough to get me out for good. I called Gloria and told her about Ella. Gloria said, "Fear is a landlord too, and the rent keeps going up." I called the developer and pitched like my life depended on it. His name was Frank Calloway, Calloway Development, and he didn't say yes on the first call. He said, "Send me your portfolio." So I did. Photos, references, reports. 3 days later, he called back. "If you want it done right, you call Magnolia." We met. I wore the only blazer I owned. Frank shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "You're the real deal, Tessa. Let's do this." I signed a 2-year contract. Magnolia grew fast. More hires, a van. I printed business cards. And just when I was strong enough to think about leaving, my father called me into his office and slid papers across the desk. A move-out agreement demanding I leave the cottage by March 1st. I scanned it and saw the buyer's name, Calloway Development Group. My blood went cold. My father was selling the land I lived on to my biggest client, and he had clearly told Frank the cottage was vacant. I didn't sign. I didn't argue. I set the papers down and walked out. On Thanksgiving was 5 days away, and for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't afraid. I felt ready. Thanksgiving morning smelled like cinnamon and rosemary. Ella wore a blue dress and spun in front of the mirror asking, "Do I look pretty?" I told her, "You look perfect." She asked, "Will Grandpa be nice today?" I knelt, fixed her hair, and said, "I'll be right next to you." By noon, the guests arrived. Me 14 people around the table with my mother's best china and candles burning like a picture-perfect family. And then a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Frank Calloway and his wife walked in, and my father practically sprinted to greet him, laughing too loudly like Frank was his ticket into a different life. Frank scanned the room and saw me in the kitchen doorway, apron on, hair pulled back, sweat on my forehead from cooking, and my mother smiled quickly and said, "Oh, that's Tessa, our younger daughter. She helps around the house." Frank nodded politely, but I saw the faint flicker in his eyes like a puzzle piece hovering, not quite clicking into place. My father pulled him outside to tour the land, and at 2 o'clock my father stood, tapped his glass, and said, "I want to give thanks, especially for my Meredith, Dr. Meredith Morgan Hartley." And people applauded. Meredith smiled tightly, and then my father turned to me, paused for the beat, and said, and of course, Tessa," lifted his glass higher and grinned. "One daughter is a doctor, the other one is a maid." He laughed. A few laughs sputtered and died. Frank didn't laugh. Under the table, Ella's hand found mine, cold, and she whispered, "Mom, is being a maid bad?" The table froze. My mother tried to rescue it with a strained smile. "Honey, Grandpa's just joking." But nobody laughed, and I set my napkin down, pushed my chair back, and stood. And the scrape of the chair against the wood sounded like a declaration. I looked at Ella first and said, "No, baby, being a maid isn't bad. Any honest work is good work." Then I looked at my father, my voice calm like I was speaking to a client, and said, "But since Grandpa brought it up, let me tell you what your mom actually does." My father hissed, "Sit down. This isn't the time." And I said, "You made it the time." No one breathed. "I started cleaning houses," I said. "That's true. I'm not ashamed." I paused long enough for everyone to swallow. But I didn't stop there. I built a company, Magnolia Estate Services. I manage 15 luxury properties across the Shenandoah Valley. I have 12 full-time employees. And last year my revenue was $2.3 million. Someone at the far end whispered, "What?" My father went pale. My mother's hand rose to her throat. Meredith stared at me like I was a stranger, and then I heard a glass set down slowly, deliberately. Frank lifted his eyes. Yin looked at my father, looked at me, and I watched the puzzle piece finally click. Frank stood up. Not dramatic, not loud, just like a man who needs to say something correct, and he said clearly, "Tessa Morgan, you're the owner of Magnolia Estate Services." The room stopped. Frank turned to my father, polite but cold. "Richard, you didn't tell me your daughter runs Magnolia. She's managed my portfolio for 2 years. She's one of the best operators in this region." And then he paused, in his gaze sharpening, and said, "And you told me that cottage was vacant?" The air changed. It wasn't family drama anymore. It was ethics and business. I said evenly, "He handed me a move-out agreement last week. March 1st. Buyer, Callaway Development Group." Frank leaned back, looking at my father like a man watching someone sabotage their own contract. "Richard," he said slowly, "I don't do business this way." My father tried to smile. "Frank, it's a family matter." Frank cut him off. Still quiet, sharper than a shout. "It became my matter the moment you lied to me." Right then the doorbell rang. My mother stood up, face drained, and opened the door to Gloria Ashford in a navy coat holding a copy of the Shenandoah Business Journal. My father choked on her name. "Gloria, what are you doing here?" Gloria smiled like someone who had waited a long time. "Thanksgiving." She walked straight to the table, set the journal down, and opened it to a full-page photo of me in front of an estate with Magnolia's logo behind me, and the headline, "How a Single Mom Built a $2.3 million Business from Scratch." 14 people stared at it like evidence. Gloria looked at my father, not cruel, just sad, and said, "You were so busy being ashamed of your daughter. You missed what she became." Frank set the journal down and stood straighter. "Richard, I'm going to pause our land discussions," he said. And that word pause sounded exactly like over. Then he turned to me and gave a small nod, one business owner to another. I'll call you Monday, Tessa, we have work to do. I answered, yes, sir. Frank and his wife left, and no one dared stop them. Within minutes, guests started inventing excuses and slipping out. The candles still burned, but my father's stage had gone dark. I lifted Ella into my arms and she whispered against my neck, Mom, is that the Tuesday call man? I gave a small laugh. Yes, baby, that's him. I looked at my parents and said, I'll be out of the cottage by the end of the month. My father's voice cracked. Tessa, don't do this. I said quietly, clearly, not because you asked, because my daughter doesn't need to grow up in a cage. My mother cried. Real tears this time. Meredith's eyes were red as she gave me a tiny nod, like she finally understood her silence had always been part of it. I walked toward the door and found Gloria on the porch like she hadn't come to destroy anything. She'd come to open a door. My living room is big enough, she said. Plenty of space for two. Ella looked up at her and asked, Are you the lady who sends me birthday cards? Gloria smiled. Every single year, sweetheart. I buckled Ella into the car seat, closed the door, and watched my parents' house shrink in the rearview mirror. No one came outside to wave. And the strange thing was, I didn't hurt the way I expected to. I just felt light. By the next Sunday, all of Millbrook knew what happened. Small towns don't need the internet. They have church, coffee hour, and parking lot gossip. But the thing that changed wasn't the rumor. It was the way people looked at me, not with pity anymore, but with respect. The article hit the stands right on time. New clients called and said, I read the article, like it was a password. Ella's teacher stopped me at pickup and smiled. I always knew there was more to you. My father disappeared from every place he used to perform. No Rotary, no church, no returning calls. 2 weeks later he called me, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard. You made your point. Can we move past this? I was washing dishes in Gloria's kitchen while Ella laughed chasing Gloria's cat. And I answered calmly, Dad, I didn't make a point. I told the truth. He went quiet, then rasped. The land deal fell through. Frank pulled out. I'm in trouble. I closed my eyes because part of me wanted to rescue him, the part that still remembered him holding my bike steady when I learned to ride. But then I remembered the 6 years he spent pushing my face into the dirt so he could feel taller. And I said, when you're ready to really talk, not move past, I'll listen. But I won't sit at another table where my daughter learns to be ashamed of her mother. He didn't answer. The line went dead. And I didn't cry. I just stood there listening to my daughter's laughter, and I knew that sound was freedom.